Well, it's a great week coming off of Easter. We're going to be jumping in a new series, but last week we got to celebrate Easter. And even though before Easter we walked through a little bit of pain and suffering of Jesus as he nears the cross, we get to remember because of Easter, there's resurrection and there's new life that comes from death. And this became even more sweet for me this week. My late sweet grandfather, Grandpa Koomen, at the age of 88, Easter morning got to go be home with Jesus. And I don't know if there's a better entrance into heaven than on Easter morning. I mean, that just a wonderful time for him. And we got to celebrate his life this week. But it's one of those things where if we didn't have the resurrection, weeks like this would be much harder. Right? Because there's sorrow and grief, but because we know who Jesus is, because we know of his work on the cross, that made this week so much lighter. Not that there isn't tears and sorrow, but it's all encompassing with hope and knowing that someday we'll be able to see him again too, right? And for us, that resurrection does bring new life for us as well. Knowing that Jesus conquered death, we get to participate in that very thing too. See, Jesus, on the work of the cross, he paid for the sins of his people, for the price of his people. And we now have an open invitation to be part of Jesus' people. Being a child of God means something. And over this week, we're going to start to set the stage for our next series. We're going to be starting next week in the 10 Commandments and slowly breaking it down one by one, the things that God calls his people to be a part of. And we've just gotten out of Mark. And so this is thousands of years before that, but this whole story, this whole Bible truly is a book of God pursuing his people. And even though we continue to fail, that they continue to fail, that he always pursues his people. And we're going to be slowly going through the 10 Commandments to look at what does it mean to be a part of God's chosen people. But the first step is realizing that it is for the people of God, right? What does this mean for us? And being a people of Jesus, being a people of God requires us to live in a different way, almost to be distinct from the culture around us. For me, when I think about being a Koomen, I got to reflect on that even more so this week. One thing, being a Koomen, being a product of my father, which was a product of his dad, my grandfather, one of the things we do as Koomens is we put milk on our ice cream when we're putting it in a bowl. Anyone else? None of you either? Guy, I feel so much, I hope no one lost respect for me here a minute, but we'll explain anyway. So when we get ice cream, we scoop out like 3 or 4 scoops into a bowl, and then we also get out the milk, put like a cup of milk in there, and churn it all up together, and it makes like this flurry consistency. Is anyone else like, this is crazy, I've never heard these things? If you remember anything from today, I hope you know better now how to make ice cream. But that's one of the things we do as Koomens, that when the ice cream comes out, so does a gallon of milk, because we all put milk on our ice cream. My wife thinks we're nuts and has not fully embraced who we are yet, but we'll break her down slowly and surely. Another thing that it means to be a Koomen is Dutch. We're very Dutch. We've got a very Dutch heritage. So we go back to the Netherlands even. And often Dutch people get stereotyped as being like financially savvy or just watching every penny, right? They're Dutch. And I've also taken that on myself and my dad. I've watched my dad do it. I've watched my grandpa do it. And even celebrating in my grandpa's life this past week, one of the stories that came up was just super interesting. The finances, it doesn't stem from like wanting to be crazy wealthy at the end. It stems from wanting to provide a safe environment for our family and make sure our families are provided for. So that's why we watch every penny and where it all goes. And for him, it was nothing different. He grew up on a farm and had the Koomen farm to this day. And often when the farm was slow, he'd look for a job to do elsewhere. And money was getting tight, so he needed a job. I believe this was in the 60s. And what he did is he went and started working at Holland Suco Color Corporation. Anyone ever hear of that? Okay, do you? Yeah, so Holland Suco Color Corporation. Even if you don't know what it is, They're a color corporation. Okay, so they pick out colors, they work with pigments and figure out different shades for different types of companies and all of this stuff. And my grandpa got a job there. And he worked there for a little bit. And after a short season there, he was doing some things with colors, I'm assuming. And his manager was probably frustrated with him because Grandpa wasn't doing the right thing with colors that he was supposed to. And you can imagine the manager saying, okay, well, why are you doing this? And my grandpa then had to let out the lie that he was colorblind. Oh, so he had gotten a job in the 60s in a color plant as a colorblind man. Just you can't make stories up like that. But he did no longer work there after that moment. That was one of the last days for Grandpa at the color plant because they didn't think they needed someone colorblind giving colors out to different people. So that stopped his color career. But what I got out of that is Grandpa was faithful to his family. Right? Financially, he wanted to make sure that he could provide for them financially, that his wife and his kids didn't need to know if the farm bill was going to be paid at the end of the month. He wanted to take care of that. And that is something that my dad did. It's something that I'm trying to do in our family now. When I was growing up, my dad was a big Dave Ramsey guy. Loved Dave Ramsey and followed a lot of the Dave Ramsey stuff. And so even at the age of 6 or 7, we grew up on Ottagon, so by Whining Creek, about 15 minutes that way, and on the dirt road section. And if you're unfamiliar with that area, it's the county line between Ottawa and Allegan County. So if any, how do I say this right? If any people wanted to consume beverage while they were out for a drive, often they'd hit a county line because less cops are there. Students, that is not a hint, okay? And so often as a 6 or 7 or 8, like much even before I could drive, we would bike down our road and around the blocks by us and collect cans because there were plenty of beverage cans that we could collect and turn in for a 10-cent deposit. Now, being financial, my dad said, okay, with the money you have coming in, which is just a lot, 10 cents at a time, right? He developed a budget for me. So 10% right off the top had to go to church. It was as the tithe. So 1 cent out of every can went to the church. And 50% of it, so 5 cents out of every can, he thought it was very important for me to start a pre-retirement fund at the age of 6. So 50% of every can went to a pre-retirement fund savings. Oh my, right? And 40% I got to spend on my own. And I'm like, when we first developed this, I'm like, 40%, that's great. I'm going to be able to spend like crazy until I realized that's 4 cents out of every can. And there's not a lot of things that, it takes a lot of cans to add up to 4 cents, to anything with the 4 cents. So, but that is how I was raised. Like, and I was able to buy some things with that, working off that budget because I bought things I cared about then. And I didn't buy things that I didn't care so much about because I knew what it took to get that money. I was raised in that way. To be a Koomen means to put milk on your ice cream, to be a bit financially savvy and know where money is going, right? And what's interesting in this, even though that is how I was raised, as a Koomen, I can turn from those things at any point. Right? I've got the free will. I can say to my dad, put the milk away. You're an animal, right? I could say that. I could say, we don't eat ice cream like that. Everyone else thinks we're crazy. Why are we still doing those things? I could say that. I could completely turn away from all things Koomen. I could, they make this crazy little plastic card that you can go out into the world and buy anything you want, even if you don't have money for it. It's wild. And I could go out into the world and I could live a completely drastically different life than that of a Koomen. And I could turn from all things that are my identity and how I was raised. I have that option. I can refuse to link myself to any part of my family heritage. And I could also get to the point, even so far so, that I could cut complete ties. I could go to the courthouse and change my last name even so that no one even understands that I come from that. It's my option, Right? It's my choice. A lot of the things, because I love my family and I love the roots that they've built for me, I latch onto those things because I want to be a Koomen. I'm choosing to be a Koomen. And because of that, I live a life that's different than some people. You know how many looks I get when we're scooping ice cream and I pull out a gallon of milk and people are like, what are you doing with that? Right? Like it's different. There's different things that we do that is different in this culture. But that's also not just with our families, is it? Or when we think about being a people of God, we also have that option with God. We also have that option with if we're going to choose to follow Jesus or not. See, when I was a youth pastor, one of the questions that would come up occasionally is, okay, if God's creating us in a wanted relationship with us, why didn't he just make us have a relationship with him? Right? Like just make us so that we don't have to choose, that we just follow him and we do all the right things, and that would eliminate pain from this world because we would all just follow God. And yes, that makes a lot of sense until you start thinking about the relationships that we have personally. Like if my wife was obligated to love me, that she had to love me, that she had no choice to love me, that would change our relationship a bit, right? For sure, from my perspective, like it hurts a bit more if I know that she doesn't have to, that she has to choose me, that there's no other option for her. All of a sudden, that love isn't actually there because it's something she has to do. And I'd argue that's similar for God. For him, he wants us to choose him. If we're going to have a relationship with him, he wants it to be a relationship that we want as well. Something that's going both ways, that we're also pursuing relationship with him. So because of that, God made a choice. He made a choice for his people, that you can choose me or you can choose the things of this world. And that's where sin comes into this whole creation ballgame here, that because there's a choice, there has to be an option outside of God. And what is outside of God? Sin. So that's where sin comes into this game a little bit, that if we have options, we also have to deal with this issue of sin being a part of our nature. One of my favorite images or portrayals in the Bible is this idea of Jesus being the groom and we, the church, are the bride of Christ. I think it's so beautiful. And if you've been to baptisms here, we did one a few months ago even, and the babies, the infants, get a small wood box. And that wood box looks very similar to that of the box that I got down on one knee for and asked Jolene to marry me. And I think that image is so beautiful in this as well, that Jesus has gotten down on a knee for us, right? For all of us. He has gotten down on a knee and said, will you be mine? Right? Will you be my people? Will you associate with me? And it's up to us if we're going to leave him hanging or not. And it's up to us if we're going to say yes. And it's up to us then at that point to live differently. He's saying, will you commit to be mine? And the offer extends to us. But the question is, will we accept that? Or do we want to be that kind of people? So I hope that as we step into this series next week, that you get to wrestle with that a little bit. And if you're on the edge of the seat debating like, okay, do I actually want to be a people of God? I hope that you'll see the fruits from this series in the ways that God laid out the best way to live. And if you've been a Christian your whole life, if you could recite these 10 commandments by heart, I hope that you realize that this truly is the best way to live, and to not just be something you know, but to actually live all out. But first, I want to look at what it means to be a people of God throughout the whole Bible. We're going to start in the Gospel of Mark because we've just wrapped up a series in Mark. We ended with Easter last week, but in Mark, Jesus, we're doing a little bit backwards, but since we're just fresh off of Mark, Jesus expresses some commands, what it means to follow him, and the two greatest commands. I want to read some of the language here a minute out of Mark 12. It says this: one of the teachers of the law came and heard him debating. Jesus being, I believe he was teaching in the temple or the synagogue at that point. Notice that Jesus had given them a good answer. He asked him, of all the commandments, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no greater commandment than these. Now remember what their title was: teachers of the law. Or teachers of the law. So what did they value? What did they find important? We've talked about this numerous times before. They valued the law. They wanted to make sure the law that God had given them was obeyed. So by doing that, they made even stricter guidelines around that law so that no one would get close to breaking any of God's laws. But in that, they got so concerned about what the laws were and the things they had to follow, all the rituals, that they forgot the most important thing in it. You see, if I think about my relationship with Jillian, if I do a good job, husbandly duties of emptying the dishwasher and mowing the lawn and making sure our cars, that the maintenance is taken care of, that the oil changes are done, and by saying that, I mean like I take them to somebody who's doing that, who's more manly than I, but I take them there, right? I take care of that. And as a husband, those are good duties to be a part of. But if that is all that was who we are as a relationship, there's something huge missing. Or there's some really good things about that list, but if I don't commit to being in relationship with her, if I'm not pursuing her, if I'm not communicating with her and sharing each other's feelings and goals and life ambitions and working alongside each other to reach those things, if I'm not doing those things, I've completely missed the point. And I think Jalen would agree in that if I'm doing the list of tasks and laws and things that it is to be a good husband, but don't pursue relationship with her, she doesn't want that. That doesn't mean anything. All those things are good, but they're useless if I'm not actually pursuing relationship with her. And I think the same thing comes for us in our relationship with God. We can often look at the list of rules and laws, and I think those teachers of the law did that very thing. They wanted to make sure that the list was all taken care of, but they forgot who they were pursuing, and they forgot to pursue him. So, let's jump our way back through history, because that is who God's people is. That's who God's people are. This is what they are trying to do, but they continue to fail. So let's jump to the very beginning of time. We're going to look at Genesis, then we're going to look at Exodus, and that's going to be our launch pad for the rest of this series here. So I'm going to pull up a timeline here a minute, if you could pull that up on the screen. Don't worry, none of you need to go to the eye doctor. I can't read it from up here either. So that work? Okay, so a few things. Well, on my computer it looked way more clear. But anyway, a few things that you can for sure see. There's a cross here on the bottom right. Okay, that is where our story of Mark is taking place. That is the life and death of Jesus right there. If we go rewind way to the top left here, there's that little circle. If you can really see color, unlike my grandfather, that's a globe. You can see the blue and the green a little bit in there. Shortly after that globe is a triangle that's in gray. Everyone, can you see that triangle that's just like 2 foot over from that-ish? Like right under the N of timeline. That says in Egypt for 430 years. So those are the two stories we're going to look at. The story in the beginning of Genesis, and then we're going to jump to that Exodus, that time in Egypt. And right as that time in Egypt ends, as that pyramid-ish goes down, we get Moses. And that's where our story for the next 10 weeks is going to be in, looking at this story. But often, I think churches just do this generally. Like we often will take a book or a chapter and slowly go through it. And it's easy to forget that this is all one story. Right? We've just been in Mark by the cross, but this is truly one story of God continuing to pursue his people over and over again. So we're just going to start at the very beginning and jump through that. So Genesis 2. We're going to see God lay out a first law or command that we see from him. Genesis 2, verse 8. Now, the Lord God had planted a garden in the east, in Eden, and there he put the man he had formed. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. In the middle of the garden was a tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die." Command number one, law number one, idea number one, do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. See, for me, and I hope for you too, there is plenty of clarity in that to know, okay, that's what they should do, right? Adam and Eve should not eat from that. That is very clear. There's plenty of other trees and bushes and shrubs to eat from. There's lots of other things to eat, and I'm sure it was great food. But yet, we know from this story, if you've read any part of this, that Adam and Eve eat from that very tree. And sin enters into the world, and that relationship between people and God has been broken. And from that story, we know that God, like we said before, God will continue to pursue his people. He wants relationship with them, but that is now broken. And we find throughout this next book that kind of rhythm, that kind of story continues with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Noah's before that. And then we get to a book called Exodus. And in Exodus, the people have been put into exile by the Egyptians. They've been thrown into exile, and they are in Egypt for about 400 years. I believe it's around 450 years that they are slaved in Egypt. Now, at this point, God hears their cry, and so God sends Moses to get the Israelites out of Egypt. And in the meantime, there's a lot of things that happen. So I'm doing a quick overview of Exodus. So if you've got time this week, make sure to read through it because it's a lovely book. But the Israelites see God do some incredible things. They see his work through Moses with some plagues and some miracles that happen. They see him part the Red Sea as they're escaping Egypt, and they see they're able to go through dry ground. They're in the desert. There's nothing to eat out there, and God provides manna and water for them to eat and to drink. Like, they now see again that God is faithful and God is for them, and he will continue to provide for them. And so in that, they're wandering around in the desert, and God has designed a place for them. He's picked out a spot where they are to go next, and it's called the Promised Land. But before they go there, he's got some instruction about what that needs to look like. So we're going to jump in. Exodus 19, verse 1 through 8. On the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, I'm very Dutch, and that's not a Dutch name, so let's just go with it. They entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to tell the descendants of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I've done to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." God is talking about this deliverance, that he's fully delivered the people. Verse 5. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possessions. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. And I don't know if you caught it there, the kingdom, priests, and a holy nation. That's language that's used throughout the Bible. We even see that when Peter is speaking to a group of people saying, you are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God. Right? This, throughout the Bible, God is pursuing his people. Verse 7. So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. So from this point, after the people agree to be the people of God, they're saying, we want to do these things. We trust who you are. We've seen you provide, and we want you to continue to do that for us. So they're admitting, yes, we will follow your commands. So then God speaks to them. Moses goes back up to the mountain, and God speaks to him in this way. And we know these words, and we'll be spending a lot of time over the next 10 weeks really looking at these closely, but we know these as the 10 Commandments. Chapter 20, verse 1. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in the heavens above or in the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Honor your father and mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord has given you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. See, these words that God spoke to the people would truly be the words that would set his people apart if they abided by these things. Now, as the people of God are wandering around in the desert before they get to the promised land, God wanted to bring clarity, like he did in the beginning, like Jesus did in Mark, of this is what it means to be my people. This is what it means to follow who I am. But instead of looking at it in the idea of laws or rules that we need to follow, throughout this series, we're going to take a little bit of a different perspective of looking at it in not so much laws, but okay, if we follow God, one of the results will be, because we love God so much, because we know he will provide for us, because we trust who he is, that we know he's all powerful and all knowing, because we know those things and we're living that life, the fruit of it will be, we're not looking for other gods to fill in the gaps, because God is all of those things. So we don't need to look elsewhere. What if we looked at the 10 Commandments as being results of or fruit of what God has spoken to us? You see, there's two ways of seeing it. Laws that, almost like a mean dad putting down laws of these are the things you need to do in our household. Or looking at it as gifts of fruit that could come from it because we live in those things. See, as a Koomen, we may be mocked a bit for being Dutch and watching our money, but one beauty that's come from that is I don't have to worry when I lay my head down at night if the bed I'm laying in is paid for, or the house I'm living under won't be the house I am going to live under if I can't make my mortgage payment. Right? Because I'm a Koomen and because I've been trained and I know the best way to live as a Koomen is to budget and make sure we know where all the money is going, because we live in that way, there's some really nice fruit that comes from it. That we don't have to be stressed about finances because we may, and it's not that we've got so much money coming in that we don't need to live by finances, but it's more so we just watch where our money goes. And we don't do some of the things of this world. We don't go out to eat a lot. We do enjoy some nicer things in life, but we don't enjoy too much. We know where our money goes, and we have priorities because I was raised in that way. See, in the same way, I wonder if we shifted our mind in this next series to think about the 10 Commandments in that way. That if we took each 10 Commandment and slowly looked at it and said, if we follow God, what is the fruit that comes from living in such a way as this? See, it will look drastically different than what our culture is used to. So what can we take away from this today? What do we do with this coming out of this? I think the first thing we need to fully understand is the reality of sin in our lives. And realizing that sin entered the world, and because of that, we have the options to not choose what God may think is best for us, right? We have that option. But there is a brokenness inside of us, that sinful nature that is inside of us that often wants, I would say what comes natural to us is rarely best. Right? Like in our human nature, what is just in our core, our sinful nature often will lead us astray. So what comes naturally, I would argue, is rarely best. But God has been very clear about really some of the best ways to live. See, God gave us 10 lists. And I think if we take a look at that list, and we'll go much closer over the next few weeks, but if we think about the 10 Commandments as a whole, and if all of society lived by those things, how much of a different world would we live in? Or you start thinking about if everyone obeyed those things, if no one was coveting what their neighbors had, if there was no murder, if there was no lying, if people honored their mother and father, if they did all of these things, that would be a world that God designed. Right? It would be a world that God always wanted from us from the beginning. So 2 questions I want you to ask yourselves with today as we wrap up today. Have you or will you say yes to being a people of God? Have you or will you say yes to being a people of God? Will you be a follower of Christ? And second, will you commit to being here? Nationally, there's a statistic out that says people say they're regular attenders if they're coming to church 1.8 times a month or something. So not even 2 weeks out of a Sunday. I strongly believe there is power in gathering together. And I strongly believe there is power in understanding what God has to say. But it is best when we gather together and we know, okay, this is what it truly means to be a people of God. And I know things come up, so I don't want to guilt you in this, but I want to push you to take that next step and understand, okay, what does it look like for us to truly be a people of God? How do we act when we are people of God? And if you do these things, if you truly stick and stay committed to this over the next series, I truly believe you will live a more fulfilled life. I promise you'll live a more fulfilled life. It's kind of weird to promise something from the stage that I may not see on the other end, but I truly believe God has ordained the best way for us to live. And the question is, are we willing to step into it, even if it is drastically different from our culture? So let's figure out, as we wrap up today, how are we going to be people of God? And the fruit that we may see our lives lived because of those things, because we follow the laws and the 10 Commandments in a different perspective. Would you pray with me? God, I thank you for today. And I again thank you for the sunshine and the reminder of your faithfulness day in and day out. And God, I ask that as we're moving into a new series, that you help us stay committed to us and open up our eyes to the things that you have designated for our lives and the ways that you have spoke are the best ways to live. God, I ask that you give us courage to do these things outside of the safety of this church. We know it gets harder when we step out into the world, into this culture that demands different things. But God, I ask that you help us be faithful to who you are and bringing your glory into this kingdom. We ask this all in your name we pray. Amen.